We're just going to banter a few minutes, let people get on.
Oh, yeah, we are signing on. How everything is going well because we are ready for questions for you, Caleb. I've got actually a bunch of questions, Caleb, that
Oh,
have
a
come
bunch.
in
Okay.
at the last minute here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see if I can keep up.
Who are you and why should we listen to you?
Well, we've answered that. Caleb is the reincarnation of the original C.S. Lewis. He
Yes.
has much better hair this time around.
At least
Easy with the
hair.
hair talk, John. I'm right here.
Sorry. I assumed that was a style choice. I
Yeah.
see Rose is trying to enter the room. Should we let her in?
I don't know. We
Ro-
were having fun talking about her.
I don't know. I've clicked yes now. Let's see. Rosemary, you are arriving, but you are arriving tardy. I'm not sure if you're aware of how this works in regular school, but tardy is not good. Hello. Ah, you're not speaking to us. I see. That's excellent. Well, anyway, we are here. Welcome to the Two Trees podcast. My name is John Dillon. I'm here with my friend Martin Listener. He says, "Hey all." I'm
Hey,
here
all.
with Caleb Lewis
How's it going?
and with Rosemary. Say hello to everyone, Rosemary. Excellent. Oh, she did. Good job.
Just in time.
Are you standing at your counter?
Okay, in full disclosure, we just finished dinner with the family. We grilled, and it's a little chaotic, but that's how it always is. So give me like 10 seconds to get settled, and I will be here, and I will be fully immersed in this
Yeah,
here meeting.
don't worry. We've got people all around the world attending this and
I
have
don't feel the
scheduled
least.
themselves.
I feel
So we
zero
will
intimidated.
focus on your hot
Yeah,
dogs
yeah,
to
yeah.
make
Just like
sure
be
that.
right back presently.
Mhm.
Isn't there an office episode where they're having a meeting and then the one leaves for like 20 minutes and then when they finally come back, they're like, okay, now we can start the meeting. And the whole reason she left is so she didn't have to be a part of the meeting.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that was a good time.
Anyway, Caleb, thank you so much for putting together your lecture from Feld to Fruitful. It was a lot of fun. Having discussed it and put it out there, were there things that you wanted to cover and didn't cover, or were you pretty pleased with the scope of the lecture?
Well, I realized once I was done that I was like, I've just been talking about trees for an hour solid, just trees.
Yes.
So it was pretty narrow in scope. And for those of you all who watched, thank you for hanging in there. I hope you enjoyed it. I liked how it turned out, at least in leading up to the Gospels. Obviously, there's always more that I can dig into, more that I wish we could talk about. Just to broaden the scope of how does this play out in the rest of the Old Testament. I saw someone ask the question, which we might discuss. How does the Dead Sea Scrolls play into this? There's all sorts of things that we could take into account. But I enjoyed it. I had fun. So I'm hoping that others found it enjoyable as well.
Well, let's lead off with that then. I know that your specific focus was talking about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the major prophets, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, do they also use tree imagery?
They do. So sadly, a lot of the places that you see tree imagery, or especially vine imagery, the text is so broken that it's hard to tell how they're using it, sadly. Where you see tree imagery the most is in their Pesher, their commentaries that they've written on other books, especially in the Pesher on Isaiah. So really, they're already tracking with the prophets as they're speaking about this. And so their discussion about trees is exactly what we've been talking about. I'm sure there's some nuance we could bring to that. Somebody should write a dissertation on that or something, but it's pretty well in line with what we see, mostly because it's already just commentary on the biblical text. Really, it would be nice to do a full exploration of this in like the pseudepigrapha and things like that. Like, where does the Second Temple writers, where do they disagree with the Old Testament? Where do they get things wrong? Where do they start to take it their own direction? But ultimately, I do think, as far as the study of how this is used in the Old Testament and then Jesus' continuation of the Old Testament story, the Second Temple texts are probably going to be more of a uh, enlightening thing to read, but not really nuance the meaning of tree imagery. So, in that sense, I'm glad that we stuck with just the Old Testament scope.
Well, that makes sense. So then you would say that the Old Testament usage sets the bar, and really what the Second Temple period is just playing off of
Oh,
how
for sure.
it's laid out. That's interesting. So Rose and Martin, you guys had an opportunity to listen to Caleb's lecture. I'm curious to know, were there questions or thoughts that came to your mind as you were listening to it? And Sydney's too, as she wanders around being awesome in the background.
Well, my first question was, how did Caleb get involved with John? Because I wouldn't think John would be all into this tree stuff, but apparently he's all about that. So
John not like trees?
I like them a lot. It's true.
the Two Trees podcast. No, I did enjoy listening to it very much. And I just, we've gone through a bunch of that stuff already. And I know that a lot of our listeners have as well, but it was nice to see it from a different perspective, like with what you're bringing to the table. And it's so amazing how much of the Old Testament that it's used throughout. And that really brings it into the New Testament and even into our real life. So I do have a couple questions that people have brought to me about in regards to what it is nowadays and how we can utilize some of this information. So I'd love to get into that as well. But right now I'm trying to figure out how to send this on to Facebook, John. So I'm doing
Oh,
my
sorry.
job just ever so slowly.
Well, while Martin is monitoring our Facebook, so if you have questions, feel free to type them into either chat, and Martin will pick them up. But how about you, Rose? I know that you were able to listen to the lecture, and we actually talked a little bit about it. But what were your takeaways, and did your group have questions?
So my group, let's start there, okay? I ended up feeling a little bit like the little red hen because everybody I asked that they all wanted to, like they truly wanted to join me and watch your lectures and like talk about it, but we could never land on a time. And so I finally watched it by myself, came up with my own amazing questions, and just went forward from there. So hopefully next month we can get our schedules a little more coordinated. I do have some questions, but one of my first ones, and this is not in your actual lecture, Caleb, but while you were introducing or talking here earlier, you've used the word nuance 2 times. What does that actually mean? I feel like I'm hearing it everywhere now, and I want to be relevant, and I never am. So tell me what you mean by that, because I feel like it would help me understand a little bit more what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I haven't met you yet, Rose. So hi, Rose. Good to meet you. Um, yeah, nuance just means talking about the finer points. What are the fine details that this, you add in a detail and it changes small nuances of the conversation. It's just small tweaks and changes, facets. That's all. Really, in the conversation of being relevant, I need to stop saying that so that people can understand what I'm saying.
No, actually, I love it. I think it's a great idea. The thing is that in the context of talking about all the different ways that tree imagery is used, that must be important because nuance must mean if you're talking about it this way, it means one thing, but in another context, it will mean another thing. And so you really have to be paying attention in order to apply it where it needs to go. Is that mostly what you're saying?
Yeah, because I mean, you can use the tree imagery. I mean, the tree imagery comes to us in a lot of different ways. And we talked about in my lecture, we talked about how it applies to kingdoms or kings in particular, and those are two very similar ideas. So the fact that they are very similar but still a little distinct, that's what I'm talking about, like different nuances to the idea. And so you really have to take each occurrence of tree imagery, vine imagery, kind of in its own literary context. You can't just say that, oh, it's a tree, it's this thing. You have to see what is the actual author trying to do with it at this point, because again, they may be adding some new, unique facet to the metaphor.
Okay, I really like that. I think that that is one thing that I mean, without knowing it, that's what I learned from your talk was the nuancing of imagery throughout Old Testament and then into New Testament, where it's more specifically about vines than it is about trees, or at least that's what I took away. But I'm going to let Martin have a minute to ask a question, and then I have several more I would like to
Well,
dig.
let me go ahead and jump in here. First of all, I'm sorry. I assume everyone that I know knows everyone else that I know. And so my apologies for not introducing Rose and Caleb before. Um, I assumed you knew each other. You should be friends. You're both good people. By the way, I suppose then Caleb's word is nuanced and Carrie Griffles is disambiguate. And so we're excited to see what other fancy bougie words appear in the upcoming weeks. And so everyone make a note. that we need to nuance our disambiguations.
And
But
Okay,
the
great. I got to go back and count. Did I use this like 100 times during the lecture?
it's possible.
But John,
Oh,
the chat actually confirmed that what Carrie said is an actual word last week, so therefore I agree with what the chat says.
That's just fake news. That's the Googling and that kind of a thing.
If it's on the internet, it's true.
Oh, well, there we go.
Abe Lincoln said that.
It's fact then. I do have a question for you though, Caleb. As Rose brought up, did the ancient peoples distinguish vines from tree imagery? Because as a Westerner, I think of those as kind of different things. But really, a vine is especially a grapevine. It is a tree. It's wood.
hmm Yeah, well, I think that from what you see in the imagery itself, they are often used distinctly, though in the same way. And so, for whatever reason, it seems that the biblical authors like to use the vine imagery as opposed to tree imagery, mostly when talking about Israel alone. Sometimes Israel is a tree too, but I think maybe just the idea of that fruitfulness that comes out of a vine, maybe that's the reason that Israel as a vine was chosen rather than Israel as a tree, because trees can be a lot of different things, but when you're thinking of the grapevines that they grew in Israel, that's such a fruitful and rich image. The richness of wine that comes from that. You think about the wine metaphor, or the wine imagery in Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49 on Judah. The wine is just this image of richness, and so I think that's why the vine may have been applied to Israel. But yeah, they are distinct, but can be used in the same way because it's still that kind of plant imagery. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Did you guys have other questions? I have a list, but I don't want to steal your time.
Well, if Martin doesn't mind, I'm going to jump in because one of my questions was specifically about vines. And I want to apologize in advance if one of my kids bursts in here loudly because I will just mute myself quickly. I'm not kidding when I say it gets chaotic around here. Okay, so one thing that I noticed, and I did not write down the reference, but in the Old Testament, you talked about the vines being planted lovingly, and then they are tended by God, but the vines have been turned away. They kind of turn their attention away to like wood and stone. This is actually in the scriptures. It's not what you said. It's one of the verses you highlighted. Anyway, and so because of that, the walls have been taken down and the vines have been let into everything and everybody, like all the idols of wood and stone. And so they're producing wild grapes. Are you following that, whichever reference that was?
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe I remember where you're going.
Okay, so in the Old Testament, that kind of produces wild grapes. But then in the New Testament, when they do not go, now they're not whoring after other gods, but what they're doing is serving the Lord with their lips and not with their heart. So what they are now is unfruitful. So what would you consider the difference to be between producing wild grapes versus being unfruitful? Is there a difference? And what is that difference? Does this question make sense? Are you
Yeah.
Okay, great.
No, yeah. So I mean, the wild grapes idea, that's just it's bad fruit. That's the point. And so as long as the people's hearts are turned towards their idols and things like that, they're going to produce bad things. And then as long as they're turned towards Yahweh, He's going to produce good things. And so really, I think if you go back to John 15, where He talks about if you listen to my word, you'll produce good fruit. If you trust in these idols, again, you're going to produce bad fruit. So really, it's just the way that in this particular context, the wild grapes are understood as bad. And so again, you just kind of have to take the cue of the author and realize that he's talking about this is what comes from idolatry. This is the bad stuff. Every farmer in Israel knows this, and so that's kind of the common sense behind it. Does that answer the question? Make sense?
It does. It just kind of furthers it a little bit because I wonder if it is, I know that both of them would be wrong. I wonder if it's a difference of like degree and not kind to either produce wild grapes that are, I mean, when in my mind, this is like cross contamination. Like we live in a farming community and we've planted sweet corn before in our garden that gets cross pollinated with wild, like, field corn, and it is not good. And you don't want, yeah. And so like to the wild grapes, that the fruit that they're put off is that bent towards idolatry. Whereas in the New Testament, to be unfruitful completely, you're getting pruned and cast into the fire and stuff. So I think that, Go
I
ahead.
think again that's where again the metaphor is malleable. You can change how you use it, and so you can either say that the unfruitfulness is the bad thing that you get, or you can say the bad fruit is the thing that you get. So that part changes, but I think in this case, it's not like, okay, nothing is bad, so wild grapes must be something kind of in the middle. And I think it's just that in this case, the prophet decided I'm going to describe bad by wild grapes. So the wild grapes, completely bad. I wouldn't say there's anything like cross-pollinated in them. Same thing for unfruitfulness. They're just
I,
two
I
different
think
bad
the New
metaphors.
Testament kind of runs with that a little bit also when it talks about the fruit of the Spirit, and then it contrasts them then with the fruits of darkness. It gives you a list of sins. It's not a definitive list, but to me that imagery is, the fruit of the garden is what God intended to grow there. The wild grapes have their source out in the wilderness, out amongst the wildness. And wild to me is a positive thing because I like going hiking and being out in the wild. But in the imagery that's being used here, it's saying that the source of these is from the darkness. It's from the wilderness. And so having that come in and to grow in the garden is a way of describing not the kingdom of God. And so it really is nuanced, if you follow what I'm saying. There is a lot of context that drives the discussion and not word study. I love a good word study, Caleb, but how do we get past the fill in the blank mentality of word study? Tree equals this, vine equals this. How do we, and I'm a pastor, and this is a frustration for me because I want my flock reading their Bible. And they get turned off sometimes because it just seems so big. They want an equation that just unlocks the reading of all of the books of the Bible. Can you give some advice to the average
John,
guy, girl in the pew?
before we leave the topic at hand, Carrie first said, "Great question, Rose," in the live chat. So you're getting props from Carrie. But then she said, question for Caleb or the group: might this be a change from idolatry or synchronistic worship versus to what they are doing in the New Testament?
Hmm. Well, I think of Paul when I like what you were asking, John. That's good. But yeah, so
Carrie, you have stolen my question, and I was about to get an answer, and I'm looking at you. Go ahead.
she's coming up in the future, so now you got your guns on her. So
I'll remember.
all right, so Martin, what was it?
Might this be a change from idolatry or synchronistic worship
Right.
versus what they were doing in the New Testament?
Yeah, so Paul, he's encouraging even Gentiles who he's saying like, if once you were, walking in death, you were walking in the flesh, and what do you reap from that? Death. And I don't think in that he is, he knows that they used to be idol worshippers. So I don't think there's a huge distinction myself about like, okay, well, not doing stuff is no fruit versus idolatry is bad fruit. I think really it's just yeah, it's all bad. You're going to produce something either way. However, in the context of talking about the fact that Israel was supposed to bear fruit in representing Yahweh to the nations, that's where there was no fruit because they failed that job. There was none of that fruit around. So maybe I need to go back and look at this some more. But maybe in the context of talking about Israel's priestly status, you get more unfruitful language, and in their acts of rebellion context, you get more bad fruit language. I have to go check that, but that would make sense if that's how the Bible takes that.
I think that maybe as we're talking, this is coming to me that possibly the key is in John 15, where if you are in the Old Testament idea, you're, producing bad fruit or wild grapes. That's my interpretation. It could be wildly wrong. And in the New Testament,
Wildly.
you're wildly, yeah, pun intended. In the New Testament, it might be more of a no fruit, like the fig tree that he cursed and, because it wasn't producing what it was supposed to. But if you abide in him, you will produce much fruit. So
Right.
either way, like you said, it's all bad. It's wild grapes, it's no fruit. You don't want that. Like stay away from that path. But when you abide in him, you will produce his fruit. So thank you for taking us along that trail. That actually helped my understanding.
Cool. Good. All right, John, back to you, I guess.
Yeah,
Throwing you some
give me
spotlight.
some pointers to help people move past the word study approach and to approach a more content driven approach. How do you do it? If you were sitting down with a class of us and we were like, Caleb, teach us how to read our Bible. How do we do that? How do we move past this word study thing? And what tips would you give for a Bible reader to capture this nuance?
Yeah, this is an incredibly hard question, and the more that I learn, the more difficult that question becomes, and it's frustrating because not only are we reading something that's from a culture that is on the opposite side of the globe from us, but it's also 3,000 years old, and it's also not one or two little poems you got to learn about. It's a couple thousand pages. And so it's an incredibly difficult question. And so the first thing that I would have to caution anyone with is just read humbly. If you come across metaphors, be aware that, like, okay, these are the prophets. It's going to be confusing. Don't come to the Bible trying to understand, I need to systematize all this. Read the big picture and get the big picture context. What is Yahweh's heart here? Because the prophet is communicating a message from Yahweh to his people who are supposed to be his representatives, and they are failing.
Right.
That's the big picture to read in. And so the reason I bring up this big picture is because you can get into the weeds on these little metaphors, and if it doesn't make sense to you, then maybe just step back, go read a commentary, and then come back, because there's so many facets to understand. It's a whole different culture. So if you really wanted to dive into it, again, it's just a lot of Bible reading, understand how the prophets talk, understanding the imagery. First of all, in Genesis, start in Genesis and then move forward from there, because that's where a lot of the imagery, the typology is sourced out of. And if you have some spare time, maybe pick up some Akkadian, Mesopotamian, Egyptian literature and start reading. And then that'll get you more akin to what's in the Bible as well. Sadly, it's a process. It honestly is. And so read humbly.
If only there was a podcast that could help you read your Bible in context.
I don't know any of those.
Do you know one like that, Caleb? It would be,
Yeah.
if I find
Well,
one, I'll send it to you.
right. Yeah, I'm the co-host of the Bible in Context podcast. Obviously, we have the Two Trees podcast here. We've got other great podcasts that are a part of this conference. Genesis Marks the Spot, and yeah, we've got quite a few podcasts that you can source from, even just this podcast. John, don't we have a page that lists out all of the different ministries involved in putting this conference together?
Yep, it's on the Two Trees. Yep. I'll point it out again. Yep, for sure. We actually do have a question that's come in about one text in particular, but before we jump into it, because it has a million rabbit trails that we can chase. But before we do that, because it will probably consume the last part of our podcast, so I do want to open it up. I have a couple more questions here, but
John, I got one that kind of goes along with what we're talking
please
about
do.
with that. Just with the ability of getting back into the Bible. And I know that's really what the reason you brought up the Two Trees podcast in the first place, was to get people more interested in their Bible and being able to read through it and understand it. I have a question that it may be a little personal to everybody here, but I think is also a really important question to ask. When you're talking about the meta narrative or the big picture idea, when you're reading through the Bible, the question that I was asked is, how is the topic of fruitful to failed impact your personal Christian walk on a day-to-day basis? And I know the heart behind this question is there's a lot of information, a lot of rabbit trails we're getting down, a lot of, really weird things that we're going to talk about and discuss. But how does this really get you through a day-to-day relationship with Jesus?
Yeah. No, and I think that this, even before I understood it, was impactful for me, because John 15 was one of those passages that, and this is probably true for a lot of people, but that's one of those passages that is impactful, was for me at a very young, I guess, very young Christian. As a very young Christian, it was impactful for me. Now, it's practical on a couple levels, and one is, first of all, it'll just help me understand things when I'm reading the New Testament and the gospel or the Gospels and the prophets. I'll be able to understand and take home the individual messages that they're giving me. But the overarching theme, I mean, just seeing this idea of, okay, what happens to an unfruitful tree? Those who have been commissioned as a priest and ignore that role, ignore our relationship with God, ignore any responsibility we have in the life He's given us, the role He's given us, the calling He's given us. An unfruitful tree there gets cut down, and rightly so. However, on the flip side, those who are outside of that tree are openly grafted in based on just their trust in Christ. Just seeing, I mean, it's the same gospel message in a different metaphor, but you see Him just openly and willingly grafting you in, providing you with the means to bear fruit in His name and to bring you into the family, give you an important role in the kingdom, um,
Amen.
and yeah, all those things. Ultimately, just seeing Him bring you into the kingdom tree, I guess. Uh, so it's immensely practical in that sense. It's kind of the same gospel message, but through a different lens.
Yeah, I think I would completely echo everything that you just said. I think when it comes right down to it, it's a way that everyone can visualize themselves. Am I bringing something worth keeping to the people around me, to my family, to the kingdom of God? Or am I bringing something of my own? I think that I don't want to be wild grapes. I would actually like to bring something useful and helpful. And this is something I worry about as a pastor, as a father. Is what I'm doing actually making a difference? And we question that all the time. At least I do. But self-worth questions and things like that come up often.
And John,
But
how does understanding this topic, give you a gauge to answer that question? And what I'm bringing something that is worthwhile? What can we grasp from this that will answer that question?
to me, this is how
John,
oh, go
just
ahead.
just a minute. Martin, are you trying to bring application into this meeting?
I've already been called out twice in the chat already about bringing application in. So
More or less been in the
That's
you're
back of
interesting.
the
welcome.
at some point you were going to make this real for everybody. So John, please go ahead.
I'm just going to say this is how I think about myself is and other things is I like pictures. I like word studies. I like imagery. And so I oftentimes think, is this helpful? Am I being a comfort to my family? Am I being something worth doing? And it's a way of thinking. Uh, Even passages like the 23rd Psalm, which I pray every day, the shepherd leads me to this place, to this green grass by the still waters, and it needs to restore my soul. I want to be like that. And so what it does is it pulls me out of just living and it makes me examine my motives and my actions, which I think is a constant need in a self-absorbed culture like the one we're in today. And honestly, the ones we've been in forever.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that a lot of it also has to do not so much with the quality of the fruit. We're not talking about, okay, the grapes are too small. They're, a few of them aren't so great, but overall, the point is not the quality of the fruit, but the type of fruit that it is. And so is what you're bearing out, is it from a loyalty in Jesus or a loyalty to something else? I think ultimately that's how you measure what kind of fruit am I producing?
Well,
Loyalty
we
to
used to
Jesus.
go, just again, this is just
Yeah.
word picture, but we used to go berry picking in gardens and up in the mountains or at people's farms all the time. And blueberries or blackberries or raspberries or huckleberries or whatever it was. And honestly, I was much more interested in is it ripe than I was is it the biggest berry because I wanted to fill my whole bucket. The idea wasn't that's the king of the blackberries. It's the best one on the whole. I couldn't tell you what branch it came from. I just know that it's there. And so I'm not so much interested in being the best dad ever, although I do have a mug that says that. I want to be a good one, though. I want to be ripe. I want to be ready at hand with an answer or with help or whatever is needed. And to me, it's fun to see that the prophets were talking in a way that I can still understand, and not just understand, but in a way that transcends culture. Ripe fruit everyone knows what that is. That's not just something that's unique to Babylonians or ancient Egyptians. That's something that farmers in Ohio 2,000 years later can understand just as clearly.
Yeah, and those ones that aren't that ripe yet, Jesus says, if you cling to me, I have the life and the power to make them grow.
That's right. So I love trees. We did our real first series that we did was on the trees of the book of Genesis and walking through different people. And they play a massive part of the narration as well as the poetic imagery here. But Rose or Martin, did you guys have other thoughts that came to your mind or that others had asked you?
Sorry, I was still muted. I mean, I could dive in so much farther on this topic. I think what you guys are answering is very substantial information, but just understanding, what it takes to be the right fruit worth picking, and I think the transformative power that Jesus brings into your life is maybe what you're trying to ask, is a better indication of when you know you are a fruitful tree. When you're allowing him to lead in your life and letting the spirit work through you, you don't have to sit here and guess like, am I going to get picked today, or are they going to pass me by because I'm not a very good fruit, or I'm going to be whatever. You're not trying to make yourself more blue. You're not trying to make yourself more round. You're allowing the spirit to lead, and Jesus will guide you through what you need. And then there will be no questions about
Well,
it.
and I would point out also that the fruit comes from the Spirit. It isn't just something that you do. It is something that God will bring about through you. And this is also interesting to me, Caleb, in terms of like discussing kingdoms. Like when a kingdom is a tree, really what that is it's all those little individuals. It's the leadership, it's the court, it's all of the people. What are they collectively like? And so even in that, and that's hard for us as individual focused people to think of ourselves as a collective thing.
Well, what you're bringing up, it's really a different side of the metaphor of Paul's image of the church as a body. They're all collective members of that one tree. And it just makes me think. I've just taken a deep dive in Ephesians because we're actually about to get into Ephesians on the podcast next. And so Paul's language of fruit in Ephesians is all circulating around the idea of unity. The fruit is the things that you do that provide unity in the church body and also equip them to take care of one another and to bring other people outside of the church in. That's Paul's recurring theme the whole time is you guys are being brought in and now be unified. That's what he mainly cares about in the letter. And so that's one thing you be looking at in yourself as well is are my actions serving Jesus's kingdom and the growth of that kingdom, the well-being of that kingdom?
Question that's come in. Does tree imagery connect to the covenants?
Hmm. Well, I suppose in what way? Was there any other?
That was the question.
Okay. Yeah. So I suppose it could be just in the sense that, I think of Sinai was the covenant was to essentially go out and represent God to the nations. That representing to the nations, that was the fruit that was supposed to be borne by Israel. So there's no direct link unless there's somewhere in the prophets I'm not recalling right now between
What
like
about the like
fruits.
the fact that God chooses to speak from a bush
Oh, okay. Um,
or the rod of Moses? These are just ones that are popping into my head here.
right, right. No, so and that goes a little bit back into the question of when is a tree just a tree and when is a tree a symbol? When is it a metaphor? All those things are different because in narrative, you're going to get symbolism. Whereas in the poetry of the prophets, you're going to get metaphors. I think the things that we see in the narratives, we're not supposed to so much take as like, okay, maybe the burning bush is supposed to represent a nation or something like that. It's more so pointing towards the tree of life, God's life-giving light and presence, the menorah that we see in the tabernacle, kind of interconnected ideas that all point to God's presence and life, rather than being a representative for, again, a tree or a king or a kingdom, something like that.
Very cool. You guys, Webster, you got any questions there, Web?
Hmm?
He's a good dog.
He's had enough.
Well, the most questions came in, Caleb, and honestly, I got 5 or 6 about Ezekiel 31. Uh,
Very good.
so if you guys could just kind of take your Bibles off to Ezekiel 31. This is a weird chapter about about a tree, and it is the biggest, baddest, bestest tree ever, according to the story. That's the John Dillon translation of the Hebrew here. It's incredibly accurate and will probably change the way that future translations are written. But if you could just walk us through this chapter, brother, there's some very odd things happening here. And I thought it might be a good opportunity for us to actually engage with how the prophets are using the tree imagery uh, in real time. So, could you just kind of walk us through this chapter, especially the trees of Eden are involved here, and down at the bottom, like the trees of Eden are envious of this tree. There's some weird things happening. Can you help us?
Sure. So let me just go ahead on the spot here and just read through the chapter, 18 verses, so it shouldn't be too bad. You good with that?
Praise the Lord.
All right. So this is Ezekiel 31. So in the 11th year, in the third month, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. The son of man, say to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? Behold, Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon with beautiful branches and forest shade, and of towering height, its top amongst the clouds. The waters nourished it, the deep made it grow tall, making its rivers flow around the place of its planting, sending forth its streams to all the trees of the field. So it towered high above all the trees of the field. Its boughs grew large, its branches grew long from the abundant waters of its shoots. Okay, so stop here real quick. And this really does look like a tree of life kind of tree. It looks like a tree in the middle of the garden of God. But we shouldn't take this as the tree of life. It's rather just describing Assyria or Egypt here, or yeah, Syria as this life-giving Edenic tree to speak of its greatness, not to speak of its, it has some sort of ontological priority over all of the nations of the earth. And it's like this God-ordained nation that was supposed to be the Edenic nation. That's not what's going
You
on.
can see how God is using this image to say, Assyria, you were the greatest kingdom in the world.
Right.
And so in the imagery, you're the biggest tree. How
Right.
strong were you? You were filled with water from the deep. There's a line in here that I think has some interesting connections there. And of the towering height, its top amongst the clouds. The waters nourished it, the deep made it grow tall, making its rivers flow among the place of its planting. It almost feels like this tree reaches to the heavens, which has like Tower of Babel connections to it in my
Yep.
mind, and also that the world tree imagery that you see in mythology around the world.
That's mostly what you're getting at here is that kind of that world tree idea. But here, its height and its beauty are mostly the superiority of the nation rather than its rebellion, like the Tower of Babel. It's mostly about yeah, again, it's superiority. And then again, you see these streams that can go out, they're abundant, so they can provide life to other nations. As you keep going down, you see in verse 6 that all the birds of the heavens, they made their nest in its boughs. And so the birds in the prophets often and also in the New Testament represent the other nations. And so this tree is so abundant, so fruitful that it's providing life for other nations. It's providing nourishment to these other nations. And so, again, that's just like what God did in the garden with this tree of life that had waters running out from it to supply everywhere to the four corners of the earth, the four rivers of Eden. That's kind of the idea we're getting here. Um, Now, this can trip people up because, again, it seems like God's calling this rebellious nation like they are the garden of God. But we have to realize that this is just Ezekiel using an ancient Near Eastern metaphor to say that this nation seemed like the garden of God because it was so great. Now, there's more behind this, simply because in the ancient Near East, we think of the pinnacle of creation as being okay, God created matter and then he created the earth and space and time and all this stuff. In the ancient Near East, creation, the pinnacle of creation was the creation of a society. And so you start out an ancient Near Eastern creation story with, oh, there was no temple for the god, there was no Babylon, there was no temple inside of Babylon, and then the end of the story ends with those exact things. And so the whole tension from beginning to end is no Babylon, no Assyria. Well, in here, he's showing that kind of that cosmological expectation that Assyria is that uh, pinnacle of creation here, but they were rebellious, and so they're also going to get knocked down. And that's what Ezekiel's doing here is he's showing the Syrian tree to Egypt so that they will know you're no better. You're going to be knocked down as well because you have rebelled likewise.
So, do you make connections then to Nebuchadnezzar and his dream of the tree being chopped down, where Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is described as a great tree, and then the watchers are connected to this judgment that takes place on him here? Is that
Oh,
similar in
it's the
kind to
same.
this?
It's really the same thing going on. I have to go back to the passage. I don't recall if he was described as a fully cosmic tree, as kind of a world tree, like you said, but still he's this great, just tree above every tree. And yes, being chopped down. He could have used this exact same Garden of Eden metaphor for Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, just a couple things that I'd like to point out here is I think when you read this, reader, you should also have in the back of your mind, boy, does this also sound like Satan? It's almost like to say like what exactly is happening here. Well, this is a literal oracle for Egypt to say, don't get too big for your britches. God has brought judgment on greatness before. Let me give you an
Thank you.
example. Assyria. They were so big
Mhm.
and they fell.
And
And
for a
then he
while, they were.
begins to weave these poetic elements into it. For instance, the tree seems to be drinking up waters out of the underworld later on here. And if you were to describe the Assyrian Empire, that was their strength. Their strength was terror and death, and it wasn't a positive Eden-like experience at all.
Well, and they
They
were all encompassing. They stretched from the depth of creation to the height of creation. And so just reinforcing that greatness that was behind them.
And so reading this literally and trying to say, this is literally the tree of the Garden of Eden is only going to move you so far. You need to see the nuance so that you can disambiguate your way through this text. Rose, do you have any
Mm,
other words I can learn?
Nope.
Hmm, it's disappointing. There's some really odd parts here at the end, Caleb. Do you mind if we keep reading?
absolutely. Let's see, we kind of talked through the poetic section. So are you referring to 15 on?
Ba, 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 ba. Yes.
All right. Honestly, I thought you were going to ask me about Ezekiel 17. Let's
The
jump to Ezekiel.
questions came in about 31.
All right. So I'll start here in 15. All right. And then I want you, after I go through this, point out what especially you think is weird. I just want to hear what exactly you think, but maybe I can pick it out first.
I don't
Okay.
think you'll have any problem picking it out.
All right.
Go ahead.
Thus says Yahweh God, on the day the cedar went down to Sheol, I caused mourning. I closed the deep over it and restrained its rivers, and many waters were stopped. I clothed Lebanon in gloom for it, and all the trees of the field fainted because of it. I made the nations quake at the sound of its fall, when I cast it down to Sheol with those that go down to the pit. And all the trees of Eden, the choice and best of Lebanon, all that drink water, were comforted in the world below.
I think that is weird.
That is. I think this may be the fact that this particular, so it may be combining the tree and tree feller idea, where this great tree has already killed all of these other trees or choked them out or something, and so now the felled trees are rejoicing at the felling of the great tree. Even in my lecture, you saw kind of the combined tree felling and tree um,
Yeah.
metaphors.
I think there's some other odd things happening here, and I know we don't have time to. I'm bringing this up so that you can hear from Caleb as to how to approach a text like this. But you're also, again, when the fall of Satan is described, the I wills of Satan, you have this really odd part where it talks about Sheol is stirred up to greet you. The Rephaim are stirred up to greet you. They are glad you have fallen just like they had. And there it's talking about, I think, Tyre, or maybe it's Babylon. I have to go back and check. But here it's the trees who are doing this same thing. And so is it nations? Is it individuals? Is it kings? Is it all of these things? This chapter in particular has a ton of moving, shifting motifs. And so
Hey,
yep.
no, I just wanted to jump in because I actually had a question about this, and I don't know when the right time to, like, as you say, get my elbows in is. But I'm going to try it now.
You
So
know the rules.
I know, just start talking.
Mhm.
So, or just say, hey, I have a question. Um, one of the questions that I had about this particular passage is how beautiful Assyria is portrayed as in this particular chapter. And as far as I can see, I never see Assyria as a positive in scripture outside of this particular chapter. Why is it being highlighted here? That's one question. And sort of a follow-up is you talked about the trees and the tree feller. But I thought that when I was going through all the scriptures that you provided, that was also Babylon was seen as that particular image also. So is that dual? Can that be either Assyria or Babylon? Those are
Um,
two different questions. So
So
answer them
the
as you see
second,
fit.
yeah, the second part of your question, yeah, it can apply to anybody. It's a metaphor, so you can, it's elastic. You can put it on any person you see that fits that metaphor, and also change the metaphor as you need to fit that person.
so
Um,
also here,
yeah,
not to cut you off, but verse 16 says, I made the nations quake at the sound of its fall when I cast it down to Sheol, and those who go down to the pit, and all the trees of Eden, the choice, the best of Lebanon, they all went down with it. So the tree feller here is the Lord. He has brought judgment on it. And so I would say the tree is not really being described in a positive way. It is under the judgment of the Most High, that it is a wild fruit,
But
maybe.
yeah.
isn't
The-
isn't this? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Caleb.
well, so what I was going to say is this kind of goes back to what I was saying about these empires being the pinnacle of creation in the eyes of the ancient Near Easterner. And so whenever you get through, basically, I think everyone who listens to the two trees would know this, and that is, where do the gods dwell in the ancient Near East? What kind of environment?
Up
Up and
gardens.
in gardens. There you go, gardens. And so the pinnacle of creation is described in a couple of ways. And again, this more elastic metaphors. You can have gardens, or you can have the empire. And so I think this is being blended a little bit here in the fact that there is beauty in Assyria. It's describing the fact that it's the pinnacle of creation, not so much that God sees it as a positive, because that beauty is going to get cut down.
Even, and again, going back to Satan, he's described as incredibly beautiful. There's this, you don't get the idea that he was just some guy when you're reading through that, or even that Babylon was just some country. There was immense beauty and expectation, and where there is um, greatness, there is also responsibility. Assyria spread death everywhere that it went. When you look at their carvings, when you look at their culture, they were collectors of heads and terrifying in their military. They're not the kind of people that made the world better because the Assyrian army was in the area. Uh, and as a matter of fact, the Babylonians and the Egyptians kind of do the same thing. This happens actually in a time period when Israel is rebelling against Babylon. And the Egyptians have encouraged them to rebel, and the Egyptians aren't going to save them. And so there's a whole list. It's a really cool. There's 7 oracles here, which is not an accident, uh, that are directed straight to Egypt. He's described in the next chapter as a sea dragon, and so you kind of get this beautiful way of talking, but it isn't an American 1+1. This is the definition. Tree plus king. This is the definition. You have to really engage with it. And I think a lot of times you're going to end up also with an understanding of the past, with an understanding of the future or of the present. I need to be good. I need to be upright. I need to give an account for the power that I have. But there's also future mystery connected to this. I don't think anyone has ever read this chapter and thought, I now understand everything Ezekiel meant. There's an element of, I'm not sure what happened, but a bomb just went off in the text.
And Caleb, Carrie is answering what I believe is your question about where the gods reside. She said they lived in the mountain time zone.
Ooh.
Saw that coming.
I don't think that's accurate, but
No.
worth a shout out, Carrie. Thank you.
Worth a shot. That was good.
A couple other questions that came up here, and I thank you for walking us through that, Caleb. A couple other questions that people who have been following your podcast and others have been curious about that came in were about why we have the particular books we have in the Bible. Were there other prophets besides these who were using this kind of imagery? And I'm going to point them here to your podcast because you've been discussing the canon and how the text originated. So go and listen to Caleb's podcast. He's put a lot of effort and time into that. But did this kind of tree imagery, is this common in other cultures as well, or was this a stereotypically Jewish concept?
John, what's the name of Caleb's podcast that they can go to?
The Bible in Context.
Yeah. So, yeah, we actually are walking through pretty in depth in the canon right now, so you can check that out. But yeah, there were other prophets using this imagery, both in Israel and I would assume outside in the ancient Near East. I don't recall if I walked through any prophetic text that used this imagery, but the tree imagery, the garden imagery, that is used throughout the ancient Near East. And so, really, the fact that Israel is using the tree imagery in their scriptures is just them being a product of their own culture. It's nothing innovative that they did. It's trying to think. It'd be basically if someone made a point, using some Southern colloquialism like we do all the time. I'm sure, John, I feel like you've probably got quite a few. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Like dead as a doornail. I didn't make that up. I'm borrowing that from my culture to make a point that something's.
I heard a good one the other day. Let me share it with you. I have neither the time nor the crayons to answer that question.
I love that
And
one.
I
I
thought
heard it recently.
I am going to use that all the time. I love that. That's good.
Yeah. But yeah, the guy at my work that actually introduced me to that. I like it. Of course, he said it to me, so that was nice. No, so yeah, the fact that they used this tree imagery is just them being a product of their culture. This was everywhere in the ancient Near East, very common.
I loved your lecture, Caleb. I've got it linked on our YouTube channel, and honestly, it's going to become part of how I bring this concept up to other people because I think it was just as good as anything that I ever got in Bible college or in those classes. This is quality information, and it's
Thank you.
presented in such a great way. Um, Caleb has some really great information. You haven't talked about your book, and I expected you to weasel it in, but since you didn't, I will. You need to read Caleb's book. Tell us about the book and where they can find it.
Yeah, so published by Stock. You can find it on Amazon. It is called Through the Waters, A Biblical Theology of the Book of Genesis, exploring primarily a Day of Atonement and especially an Exodus pattern that follows throughout the book, and I think sets up the typological expectations, the patterns of the hope and salvation of Yahweh that follow from the very beginning of the Bible all the way to the end and fulfill in Jesus. So go check that out. I think it's actually in the text, not just something that we can just try to force into Genesis so that we can see Jesus. So yeah, check that out. I hope that's helpful. And John, thank you for the compliment on the lecture and for putting this together and inviting me on. It's been a pleasure.
Caleb, the more time we can have you around, the happier I will be. You have been a blessing to me since I read your book and got to know you. I would encourage you guys to keep reading, especially books that maybe you're not as familiar with. Maybe you haven't read Jeremiah lately or really taken a deep dive through Ezekiel. Don't skip them, but give the Bible its due. Give it the time that it requires to read and to understand. I hope that you're enjoying getting together in communities or in trying to. Remember that this is going to run for quite a while. And so if you couldn't get it done this month, it's no problem. these lectures live online and you can do them whenever you want. We're going to have other ones coming up soon. And Caleb is not going to disappear. I would love for you, Caleb, to come back and join our discussion panels in weeks to come. I think that actually I'm going to make you do that. So be aware that I know where you live. I actually don't, but I can
You
find
actually know
out.
where I live?
I have no idea. As a matter of fact, I can't even place you by the woods in your background because I don't think you're really there. That's what
You
I
might not
think.
be. We're actually our woods right out here, but
I know where your church is at. I Googled that one time.
oh,
I
that's
was like,
right.
yeah, I know people who know you, man.
Well, I live in
I'll-
the next city over from my church, so you have to pin me down in somewhere in like a 15-mile radius. So good luck.
or I could call you and say, Caleb, let's get lunch. And I'm pretty sure I could find you that way.
I might show up.
Rose and Martin, I just want to publicly say that my life is so much better because of the fruit that your lives bring into my life. And what a blessing both of you guys are to me on a constant basis. Thank you so much for giving your time and your love of Jesus to help me to have a podcast. And thank you, listeners, for taking the time and listen to this. Love you guys, and I hope that you are having an awesome, awesome day. And I cannot wait to experience the next chapters with you. I want to just say I love you guys, and I will talk to you later. Just remember that Jesus is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty